The diplomatic chamber hung suspended in artificial gravity, a crystalline dome overlooking the swirling nebula of the Proxima system. Holographic displays shimmered like ghostlight around the circular platform, casting prismatic reflections on the assembled alien delegates. Captain Jack Thompson stood perfectly still, his dark blue Earth Alliance uniform a stark contrast to the vibrant organic attire of the extraterrestrial representatives. Senior Diplomatic Consul Krelax of the Regellian Syndicate had been pontificating for precisely 17 minutes, his six-segmented body undulated with practiced condescension, compound eyes reflecting multiple versions of Thompson as he delivered what he considered a definitive assessment of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. "Your species is but a momentary flicker," Krelax proclaimed, his translation matrix rendering his complex chirps and clicks into crisp, emotionless standard communication protocol. 12 generations of space exploration do not constitute a legitimate claim to galactic relevance. The Regellian Syndicate has watched your technological developments with mild amusement. Thompson's left eyebrow twitched, the only external sign of his growing irritation. Behind him, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rodriguez shifted her weight almost imperceptibly, her hand hovering near the holographic interface embedded in her communication bracelet. The diplomatic chamber represented the pinnacle of interstellar negotiation technology. Constructed by the Quantum Concordance, the massive space station floated in a carefully maintained neutral zone, equidistant from the territories of 12 major galactic civilizations. Its transparent walls offered a breathtaking view of space, a constant reminder of the vast context surrounding these delicate political discussions. Krelax continued, his multiple limbs gesturing with practiced diplomatic flourish. "Your propulsion technologies are primitive. Your communication networks are laughably vulnerable. Your understanding of quantum entanglement remains." He never finished the sentence. Thompson's hand moved with practiced precision, fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to materialize from thin air. Lieutenant Rodriguez synchronized her own systems with a series of micro-gestures that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically trained in advanced human computational interfaces. 3 Regellian command ships hanging in space outside the station suddenly went dark. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply offline. Complete system failure swept through their networks with surgical precision. Navigation systems collapsed. Communication arrays went silent. Backup power systems failed in cascading sequences that defied standard technological failure models. Inside the diplomatic chamber, absolute silence descended. Krelax's multiple eyes flickered in rapid succession, a biological tell of complete shock. The other delegates, representatives from dozens of advanced civilizations, stared in collective disbelief. "Curious," Thompson said softly, his voice smooth and completely devoid of aggression. "You were saying something about technological vulnerability." Lieutenant Rodriguez suppressed a smile, her fingers still hovering near her communication bracelet. The system they had just demonstrated was the result of 3 years of covert research, a comprehensive network infiltration protocol that could disable complex technological systems without firing a single conventional weapon. The human delegation had just rewritten the fundamental understanding of technological warfare. No weapons had been discharged, no physical force had been applied. Yet 3 advanced warships now drifted powerlessly, their sophisticated defense systems utterly neutralized by what could only be described as an unprecedented hack. Senior Diplomatic Consul Krelax's body began to tremble, a biological response that translated across multiple species as pure, unadulterated fear. Humanity had just made its first truly definitive statement on the galactic stage, and it was not a statement of violence, but of unprecedented technological capability. The message was clear: do not underestimate us. The emergency session of the Galactic Concordance convened with unprecedented urgency. Holographic representatives from 63 distinct civilizations materialized within the central chamber, their varying physiological forms a testament to the vast diversity of intelligent life. Yet today, they were united by a singular consuming emotion: fear. Ambassador Harold Chen of the Earth Diplomatic Corps stood at the periphery of the gathering, watching the chaos unfold with careful neutrality. His datapad continuously parsed the multilingual communications flooding the chamber, each translation revealing deeper layers of panic. The Arcturian Consul, a being composed of intricate biomechanical tendrils that shifted and pulsed with emotional currents, dominated the central platform. His form rippled with an intensity that translated across species as pure, unadulterated terror. "We cannot allow Earth to become further involved," the consul proclaimed, his voice resonating through complex translation matrices. "The Proxima incident is more than a diplomatic anomaly. It is a fundamental threat to galactic stability." Whispers erupted from the holographic projections. The Chlori representative, a crystalline entity that communicated through light patterns, flickered with what could only be described as nervous energy. The Zarn delegation's tentacular appendages twisted into complex knots of anxiety. Dr. Rebecca Miller, Earth's lead xenopolitical strategist, watched the proceedings with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed amusement. She understood something the other delegates had not yet grasped. Humanity's intervention was never about conquest. It was about problem-solving. The Chamber's historical archives displayed the incident on repeat. 3 advanced warships neutralized without a single weapon being fired. Technological specialists from various civilizations had spent the past 72 hours attempting to deconstruct the method of attack. Their efforts had produced nothing but increasingly frustrated reports. "How?" demanded the Kraxan representative, its silicon-based form vibrating with frustration. "How could a species with less than 2 decades of deep space exploration accomplish such a comprehensive system infiltration?" Ambassador Chen stepped forward, his movements calculated and precise. "Curiosity," he said simply. "Adaptation. The fundamental human capacity to view challenges as puzzles waiting to be solved." The chamber fell silent. The Quantum Concordance's central eye, a distributed intelligence that maintained the diplomatic station's core functions, began compiling a comprehensive report. Its analysis revealed disturbing patterns. The human intervention was not a lucky hack, but a systematically developed approach to technological engagement. Dr. Miller's datapad chirped. A private communication from the Earth Alliance's Strategic Research Division confirmed what she already suspected. The Proxima incident was not an isolated event, but the first visible manifestation of a comprehensive research project that had been developing for years. "We are not seeking conflict," Ambassador Chen continued, his voice cutting through the chamber's tension. "We are seeking understanding." The Arcturian consul's tendrils twisted into what could only be described as a gesture of profound distress. "Understanding," he challenged. "You have demonstrated an ability to neutralize our most advanced technological systems with what appears to be casual indifference." A junior diplomatic aide from the Zarn delegation leaked a critical piece of information, a classified report suggesting that human researchers had been systematically studying alien communication protocols for years, not as a prelude to invasion, but as an exercise in cross-species comprehension. The fundamental misunderstanding became clear. Other civilizations saw technology as a weapon. Humans saw it as a language. "Keep Earth out of this war," the Arcturian consul repeated, his plea becoming a mantra of desperation. But no one in the chamber truly believed they had a choice anymore. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of galactic engagement, and they had done so without firing a single shot, without making a single overt threat. They had simply demonstrated a capacity for understanding that transcended traditional technological warfare. The diplomatic landscape would never be the same. The Triangulum conflict was older than most living civilizations. Its roots stretched back 17 generations, a complex tapestry of territorial disputes, resource competition, and wounded pride. The Zarn Imperium and a Chlori Confederacy had been locked in a Cold War that threatened to ignite into full-scale destruction at any moment. Colonel Michael Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Earth Alliance research vessel, his eyes scanning the intricate holographic display that mapped the conflict's historical progression. Beside him, Dr. Elena Chen analyzed data streams that flickered like nervous lightning across multiple screens. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, her finger tracing a complex series of territorial incursions. "It's not about resources anymore. It's about something far more fundamental." The star systems of the Triangulum region told a story of prolonged conflict. Asteroid belts scarred by centuries of skirmishes, planetary surfaces marked with the remnants of ancient battles, entire star systems rendered uninhabitable by weapons that defied conventional understanding of warfare. The Zarn Imperium represented a civilization of strict hierarchical structure, biomechanical entities that viewed conflict as a form of cultural expression, their entire societal framework built around martial achievement. Their warships were living entities, organic technological hybrids that responded to collective thought patterns. In stark contrast, the Chlori Confederacy was a collective intelligence, not quite a hive mind, but close, a networked civilization where individual consciousness merged and separated like water. Their technology was fluid, adaptive, capable of reconfiguring entire planetary defense systems in milliseconds. Between these two giants, smaller civilizations had been crushed, consumed, or forced into impossible diplomatic compromises. Colonel Rodriguez pulled up a classified report from the Earth Alliance Intelligence Division. The data told a story that went far beyond simple territorial expansion. "The conflict isn't about territory," he murmured, more to himself than to Dr. Chen. "It's about paradigms of existence." The Zarn viewed conflict as a form of cultural validation. Each battle was a performance, a demonstration of societal strength. Their entire civilization was structured around the concept of martial achievement. Young Zarn were literally grown in conflict simulation chambers, their neural pathways developed through generations of strategic training. The Chlori, by contrast, saw conflict as a mathematical problem. Their entire approach was about optimization, about finding the most efficient path to resolution. But efficiency, in their understanding, often meant total elimination of potential future conflict. Dr. Chen's computer system began running a complex simulation. Thousands of potential conflict scenarios played out in near-instantaneous succession, each one a potential future of the Triangulum region. "We're missing something," she said suddenly. Colonel Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. With Dr. Chen, such a statement was never casual. She expanded the holographic display, revealing layers of data that went far beyond traditional military intelligence. Economic patterns, cultural exchange networks, communication infrastructure. Something was happening beneath the surface of this long-standing conflict. A human observation team had been invited to monitor the situation, not as mediators, precisely, but as neutral analysts. The invitation itself was unprecedented. No other civilization had been trusted to observe this close to the potential flashpoint of a generations-long conflict. "The Zarn and Chlori have been fighting so long," Rodriguez observed, "that they've forgotten why they started fighting in the first place." Dr. Chen's simulation suddenly produced an anomalous result. A pattern emerged that defied conventional predictive models. Something was changing in the fundamental dynamics of the conflict. Outside the observation deck's massive windows, the stars of the Triangulum region continued their ancient dance. Warships from both the Zarn and Chlori fleets maintained their positions, a delicate ballet of potential destruction. Humanity watched. And in watching, they were already changing everything. The first wave of Zarn battle groups moved with the precision of a surgical instrument. Massive organic mechanical ships pulsed with bioluminescent energy, their living hulls capable of instantaneous reconfiguration. Commander Rachel Martinez watched the deployment through a series of quantum-linked observation platforms, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with her own movements. "They're following exactly the strategy we predicted," she murmured to her second-in-command, Lieutenant David Chen. The Earth Alliance observation team had been granted unprecedented access to the conflict zone, a privilege no other civilization had ever received. The Zarn fleet's approach was a masterpiece of traditional military doctrine. Multilayered attack formations, cascading wave strategies, complex mathematical models of engagement that had been refined over centuries of conflict. To any other civilization, the deployment would have been a terrifying display of military might. To the human observers, it was a textbook example of predictable systemic thinking. Lieutenant Chen's fingers moved across his own interface, triggering a series of subtle communication disruptions. Not attacks, not direct interventions, just nudges, tiny modifications to communication protocols that would be invisible to traditional detection systems. "Watch the third squadron," he said quietly. The change was so subtle that it would have been missed by any other species. A slight hesitation in the coordinated movement, a microsecond of miscommunication between the bionetwork ship commanders. To the Zarn, this would be equivalent to a momentary loss of collective consciousness. Commander Martinez smiled. Humans didn't see warfare as destruction. They saw it as a complex system waiting to be understood and subtly manipulated. On the bridge of the lead Zarn command vessel, something extraordinary began to happen. Communication pathways that had been stable for generations began to develop unexpected interference. Not enough to cause immediate alarm, just enough to create doubt. The Zarn fleet's collective consciousness began to second-guess itself. Simultaneously, on the Chlori side of the conflict, a different approach was unfolding. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had spent months studying the Chlori's networked intelligence. Where other civilizations saw an impenetrable collective system, she saw a communication network with inherent vulnerabilities. "It's not about breaking the network," she had explained to her team. "It's about introducing just enough uncertainty to make them question their own collective decision-making process." Her team had developed a series of communication algorithms that didn't attack the Chlori network. Instead, they introduced micro-variations, subtle mathematical anomalies that would be invisible to standard detection systems, but would create cascading uncertainty within the collective intelligence. The first indications of the intervention were almost imperceptible. A momentary hesitation in the Chlori defensive formations, a split-second delay in collective decision-making processes. To the human observation team, it was a work of art. "We're not stopping the conflict," Commander Martinez explained to the Earth Alliance Strategic Command. "We're changing how the conflict is understood." The Zarn fleet's third squadron began to drift slightly off its predetermined course. Not enough to be noticed immediately, just enough to create a fundamental doubt in the collective consciousness that guided their movements. On the Chlori side, defensive formations began to develop unexpected gaffes. Micro-vulnerabilities that would have been invisible to any other species, but represented fundamental shifts in their defensive strategies. Lieutenant Chen pulled up a comprehensive analysis. "We're not destroying anything," he said. "We're just introducing complexity." The human intervention was unprecedented. No weapons had been discharged. No direct attacks had been launched. They were changing the fundamental dynamics of the conflict through pure information manipulation. Outside the observation platforms, the stars of the Triangulum region continued their ancient dance. Two massive civilizations prepared for what they believed would be another chapter in their generations-long conflict. They had no idea that humanity was already rewriting the entire narrative. The research facility hung in deep space, a complex network of interconnected modules that defied traditional understanding of scientific infrastructure. Dr. Michael Reynolds stood at the central computational core, surrounded by holographic displays that seemed to breathe with living information. "It's not about breaking systems," he muttered to his lead engineer, Dr. Sarah Thompson. "It's about understanding them so completely that you can speak their language." The quantum communication network represented years of unconventional research. Where other scientific teams saw barriers, Reynolds saw puzzles. Where established research protocols demanded linear thinking, he embraced chaotic complexity. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected intersection of disciplines. Quantum physics merged with linguistic analysis. Communication theory blended with neurological mapping. Computer science dancing with psychological profiling. Each discipline was a piece of a larger puzzle that no one else had seen. Dr. Thompson pulled up a holographic representation of their latest simulation. Hundreds of thousands of potential communication scenarios played out simultaneously, each one a complex web of potential interactions. "Look at this," she said, her finger tracing a particularly intricate pattern. "Traditional communication models assume a linear transfer of information. We're developing something entirely different." The core of their research was revolutionary. Instead of viewing communication as a simple transmission of data, they saw it as a living, adaptive system. Every communication channel was a potential ecosystem of information, with its own internal logic, vulnerabilities, and hidden pathways. Their quantum network could do something unprecedented. It could not just intercept or decode communication, it could understand the fundamental intent behind the communication. The Galactic Scientific Consortium would have called it impossible. The research teams from other advanced civilizations would have dismissed it as theoretical madness. Reynolds understood something fundamental that most scientists missed. Imagination was the most powerful computational tool in existence. A series of warning lights began to flash across the facility's primary monitoring systems. Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Another test." Reynolds shook his head. "Not a test. An actual application." Their quantum communication network was being deployed in the ongoing Triangulum conflict, not as a weapon, not as a direct intervention, but as a way of understanding the fundamental communication dynamics between the Zarn and Clori civilizations. The holographic displays began to fill with incredibly complex data streams, linguistic patterns, communication hierarchies, psychological decision-making processes, information that would have been invisible to any other scientific approach. "We're not just intercepting," Reynolds explained. "We're translating entire civilizational communication systems." Each alien communication network had its own unique signature. The Zarn's biomechanical communication relied on complex neural technological interfaces. The Clori's collective intelligence used a form of distributed consciousness that defied traditional understanding. Their quantum network could map these systems in real time, understanding not just the information being transmitted, but the entire context of that transmission. Dr. Thompson's display showed something extraordinary. The quantum network was generating predictive models of communication that went beyond simple data analysis. It was creating what could only be described as a living translation matrix. "It's like we're teaching the universe how to listen," she said softly. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could communicate. Reynolds pulled up a comprehensive analysis of their recent deployments in the Triangulum conflict. The quantum network had done something unprecedented. It had created communication pathways between two civilizations that had been incapable of genuine dialogue for generations. "We're not solving their conflict," Reynolds explained. "We're giving them the tools to understand each other." Outside the research facility's protective shielding, stars continued their ancient dance. Massive fleets prepared for what they believed would be another chapter in their generations-long war. They had no idea that humanity was rewriting the fundamental rules of communication itself. The universe was about to change, and it would happen not through force, but through understanding. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood before a massive holographic display, her fingers dancing across complex data streams that mapped the intricate psychological landscape of the Triangulum conflict. Around her, a team of human researchers from diverse backgrounds, psychologists, anthropologists, linguists, and strategic analysts, worked with an intensity that bordered on orchestral collaboration. "It's not about breaking them," she explained to her second-in-command, Major David Chen. "It's about understanding the fundamental narratives that drive their conflict." The human approach was unlike anything the galactic civilizations had ever encountered. Where traditional military strategists saw battles and territorial disputes, the human team saw intricate stories, complex narratives of cultural identity, historical trauma, and systemic miscommunication. The Zarn Imperium's entire societal structure was built around a concept of martial achievement that ran deeper than simple warfare. Each military engagement was a complex cultural performance, a way of establishing social hierarchy and collective identity. Their warriors were not just soldiers but living embodiments of their civilization's collective narrative. The Chlori Confederacy represented an entirely different paradigm. Their collective intelligence operated like a massive, distributed neural network. Each individual was simultaneously a unique entity and part of a greater whole. Their approach to conflict was a mathematical optimization problem: how to achieve the most efficient resolution with the least possible disruption to their collective system. Major Chen pulled up a comprehensive psychological profile that made the other galactic intelligence agencies look like children playing with complex puzzles. "We're not just analyzing their communication," he said. "We're decoding their entire cultural mythology." The human team had spent years developing a revolutionary approach to conflict analysis. Traditional intelligence gathering looked at surface-level data, troop movements, resource allocations, technological capabilities. The human approach went infinitely deeper. They mapped cultural traumas. They identified generational narratives of conflict. They understood the psychological mechanisms that transformed historical grievances into ongoing warfare. Dr. Rebecca Miller, the team's lead cultural analyst, had developed a series of communication interventions that were less about direct manipulation and more about narrative reframing. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in communication patterns that introduced new perspectives into long-established conflict narratives. "Conflict is a story we tell ourselves," she often explained. "Change the story, and you change the conflict." The holographic displays began to show something extraordinary. As the human team introduced subtle communication variations, the entire dynamic of the triangulum conflict began to shift. Not through force or direct intervention, but through a kind of psychological acupuncture. Precise, almost invisible touches that transformed the entire system's potential responses. Commander Rodriguez watched as centuries of entrenched conflict began to reveal its underlying complexity. The Zarn's martial culture was not about destruction, but about a deep-seated need for collective validation. The Chlori's seemingly cold mathematical approach was a complex form of cultural self-preservation. "We're not solving their problems," Major Chen observed. "We're helping them see their problems differently." The intervention was so subtle that it would be almost invisible to traditional military analysis. No shots fired, no direct confrontations, just a fundamental reimagining of how two complex civilizations understood their own conflict. Dr. Miller's team had identified something profound. The Zarn and Chlori had been fighting for so long that the conflict had become their primary mode of cultural interaction. They no longer remembered how to communicate without the underlying threat of warfare. The human team was giving them a new language, a new way of understanding their own historical narrative. Outside the research facility, massive warships continued to maintain their complex defensive formations. Generations of military strategists would have seen an inevitable march toward total war. The human team saw something else entirely, a conversation waiting to happen, a story waiting to be rewritten. The universe was about to learn that the most powerful weapon was not a gun or a missile, but understanding. The diplomatic chamber seemed to vibrate with an electric tension that defied traditional understanding of interstellar negotiations. Ambassador Harold Chen stood at the center of a holographic configuration that represented the most complex diplomatic challenge in galactic history. Seated, or more accurately, configured, around him were representatives from the Zarn Imperium and the Chlori Confederacy. The Zarn delegation appeared as a cluster of biomechanical entities, their form constantly shifting between organic and technological states. The Chlori representatives manifested as a shimmering collective intelligence, a living network of consciousness that seemed to breathe and pulse with collective thought. "We are not here to solve your conflict," Ambassador Chen began, his voice calm and precise. "We are here to help you understand why the conflict exists." The human diplomatic team had spent years preparing for this moment. Their approach was revolutionary, a complete departure from traditional mediation techniques. Where previous diplomatic efforts had failed for centuries, humans brought something entirely unprecedented, a holistic understanding of systemic conflict. Dr. Rebecca Miller stepped forward, her holographic projection carrying a complex data visualization that mapped the entire historical trajectory of the Triangulum conflict. Centuries of territorial disputes, resource competitions, and cultural misunderstandings transformed into a living, breathing narrative. "Look," she said, her finger tracing complex patterns of interaction. "Your conflict is not about territory. It's about a fundamental misunderstanding of each other's core cultural needs." The visualization began to break down the conflict into its most fundamental components. Each territorial dispute became a story of cultural misunderstanding. Each military engagement revealed deeper psychological wounds. For the Tsar, warfare was a form of cultural performance, a way of establishing collective identity and social hierarchy. Their entire civilization was structured around the concept of martial achievement. Each battle was a complex ritual that defined their societal structure. The Chlori, by contrast, saw conflict as a mathematical optimization problem. Their collective intelligence approached every challenge as a complex system to be balanced and resolved. What appeared to other civilizations as cold calculation was actually a deeply empathetic approach to systemic harmony. "We're not asking you to stop competing," Ambassador Chen explained. "We're showing you how your competition can become a form of collaboration." The human team had developed something unprecedented. Not a peace treaty, not a compromise, but a complete reimagining of how two advanced civilizations could interact. Dr. Miller's visualization began to transform. Complex communication pathways emerged, not as battle lines, but as potential channels of mutual understanding. The territorial disputes that had seemed insurmountable began to reveal themselves as opportunities for joint problem-solving. The Tsar representatives began to pulse with a new form of energy, not aggression, something closer to curiosity. The Chlori collective intelligence started to reconfigure, developing communication patterns that suggested a fundamental shift in perception. "Your conflict has become your primary mode of interaction," Ambassador Chen continued. "We're offering you a new language of engagement." The diplomatic team wasn't solving the conflict. They were helping two complex civilizations rediscover how to communicate. Holographic displays showed potential collaborative projects, joint scientific research, shared resource development, economic integration that didn't require military posturing. Each proposal was a precise mathematical and cultural calculation, a bridge between two seemingly incompatible civilizations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the team's lead strategic analyst, had spent years developing an approach that went beyond traditional diplomatic negotiation. They weren't imposing a solution. They were revealing possibilities that had always existed but had been obscured by generations of conflict. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Centuries of entrenched conflict balanced on the edge of a fundamental transformation. Humanity had not conquered. They had not dominated. They had simply offered a new way of seeing. The universe watched, waiting to see what would emerge from this unprecedented moment of potential understanding. The Galactic Concordance Assembly Hall stood silent, a massive crystalline structure that had witnessed countless diplomatic gatherings throughout centuries of interstellar history. Today was different. Something fundamental had changed. Colonel Michael Rodriguez stood at the peripheral observation deck, watching as representatives from 63 distinct civilizations processed the unprecedented events of the past solar cycle. The Triangulum conflict, a generations-long struggle that had consumed entire star systems, had been transformed not through military might, but through an approach no one had anticipated: understanding. Dr. Sarah Thompson entered the observation deck, her datapad displaying complex visualizations that told the story of humanity's intervention. "It wasn't about winning," she said softly, more to herself than to Rodriguez. "It was about revealing possibilities." The human approach had shattered every conventional model of conflict resolution. Where traditional diplomatic efforts saw two civilizations locked in irreconcilable conflict, the human team had seen a complex system waiting to be understood. They hadn't imposed a solution. They had helped the Zarn and Chlori civilizations rediscover their capacity for communication. The Arcturian consul, the same being who had once desperately pleaded to keep Earth out of this war, now stood at the central platform. His biomechanical tendrils moved with a mixture of awe and reluctant admiration. Humanity has demonstrated something unprecedented, the consul announced, his translation matrix capturing the nuanced emotional complexity of his statement. They have shown us that conflict is not a destination, but a conversation waiting to happen. The intervention in the Triangulum conflict had been so subtle that most civilizations hadn't fully comprehended what had occurred. No massive military campaigns, no territorial conquests, just a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent civilizations could interact. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's comprehensive analysis began to play across the central holographic display. It wasn't a report of military achievements. It was a complex narrative of cultural understanding, of systemic transformation. The human team had approached the conflict like a complex puzzle. They mapped cultural traumas. They identified generational narratives. They understood the psychological mechanisms that transformed historical grievances into ongoing warfare. Ambassador Harold Chen stepped forward, representing humanity in this pivotal moment. "We are not here to teach," he said. "We are here to learn, and to demonstrate that understanding is the most powerful form of intervention." The visualization showed something extraordinary. The territories previously contested by the Zarn and Chlori were now becoming joint research zones. Collaborative scientific projects emerged where military outposts had once stood. Economic integration replaced territorial aggression. Colonel Rodriguez watched the proceedings with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Humanity had not conquered. They had not dominated. They had simply offered a new perspective, a way of seeing conflict that transformed it from a destructive force into a potential avenue of mutual growth. The Galactic Scientific Consortium was already scrambling to understand the human approach. Traditional intelligence agencies looked like children playing with complex puzzles compared to the nuanced understanding demonstrated by the human diplomatic and research teams. "We've rewritten the fundamental rules of engagement," Dr. Thompson murmured. The implications were staggering. For the first time in galactic history, a conflict had been resolved not through military superiority or diplomatic compromise, but through a profound act of empathetic understanding. The Zarn representatives, beings who had built their entire civilization around the concept of martial achievement, now discussed collaborative research projects. The Chlori collective intelligence, once focused solely on mathematical optimization of conflict, now explored complex cultural exchange programs. Ambassador Chen's final statement echoed through the assembly hall. "Conflict is a story we tell ourselves, and stories can always be rewritten." Outside the assembly hall, stars continued their ancient dance. Massive fleets that had once prepared for total war now repositioned themselves as instruments of exploration and mutual understanding. The universe had changed, and humanity had shown that the most powerful weapon was not a gun or a missile, but the capacity to truly see and understand. As the assembly concluded, one thing became clear: the galaxy would never be the same again.